Week 9, Overview, American Ballyhoo in Hitler's Early Career. For this last week of the unit, we cover the years that Calvin Coolidge was president, 1923 to 1929. Our main focus is the Ballyhoo years, from 1925 to 1927. In Unit 2, we'll look more closely at the final years of the 20s, especially the intelligentsia who lived abroad and the rise and crash of the great bull market, which started its sensational rise in 1928. From flagpole setting to crossword puzzle crazes, from murder trials to sports heroes, from Lindbergh to the Scopes trial, Americans delighted in giving their full attention to one major news story after another. They were wildly excited about all these events and others that you'll read about. This so-called ballyhoo, meaning a lot of noise and excitement about relatively trivial matters, reached its crescendo with the successful transatlantic flight of Charles Lindbergh, and then it died down as the presidential election of 1928 and the huge opportunities on the stock market took center stage. Older students will be meeting Adolf Hitler this week and noting that he was rising to power in Germany during the 1920s after having endured a terrible childhood and served as a daring soldier in World War I. Even as a youth, we can see the seeds of insanity that led Hitler to become a mass murderer, the instigator of World War II. But let's go to John Calvin Coolidge. He was born in rural Vermont in 1872. He dropped his first name, John, after college. He moved down south to Massachusetts and became a lawyer. He got involved in local politics, then went to the state legislature and wound up governor of Massachusetts in 1918. Last week we talked about how a big police strike in Boston fueled the Red Scare. Coolidge was the governor when it happened. He called out the National Guard and fired 19 suspended police officers. The president of the labor union protested these firings, but Coolidge insisted that there is no right to strike against the public safety by anybody, anywhere, anytime. The people of Massachusetts responded by re-electing him to governor by a record margin. Coolidge became Warren Harding's vice president in 1920, until Harding's untimely death in the middle of his term made Coolidge president in 1923. As the scandals of Harding's old cronies came to light, Americans were relieved to think the government was now in the hands of a man as scrupulous as Silent Cal. When elections rolled round again in 1924, he campaigned on the slogan, "Keep cool with Coolidge." Coolidge believed in strictly limited government in all areas. He worked to reduce the size of government and pay off loans so that he could reduce taxes. Unlike Wilson, Coolidge did not believe in regulating business practices or using federal power to further social reforms. Nor did Coolidge believe the national government should provide financially for its citizens. He vetoed measures that Congress passed to aid both veterans and farmers. All other things being equal, a hands-off policy generally gives businesses a chance to grow. They certainly did in the Coolidge era. Industry boomed and the Coolidge tax cuts helped the rich. That had a trickle-down effect because capitalists turned around and invested in new industries, in real estate development, especially in Florida, and also in the stock market. As a result, many key industries flourished, and many middle-class families were better off than ever. These newly affluent people turned to the stock market themselves, sinking the money they'd made, or borrowed, into speculative ventures. There were plenty of folks left out of the Coolidge prosperity, of course. Workers in industries that were failing, like railroads, textiles, coal mining, and shipbuilding, and farmers, especially those who grew staples like grain or cash crops like cotton. The new industries boomed, though. Automobiles and radio were big. So were many other new inventions, refrigerators, telephones, all sorts of electrical gadgets. Big department stores were growing at the expense of smaller mom-and-pop stores. Advertising took off, and salesmen crisscrossed the country in search of new markets. It was the age of ballyhoo, a heightened focus on the least important things. During the Coolidge years, Americans devoted an unprecedented amount of energy and attention to the most trivial matters. The main ballyhoo events your children cover this week include the crossword puzzle craze, the plight of Floyd Collins, a trapped prospector, the Scopes trial, the meteoric rise of football player Red Grange, the Dempsey-Tunney prize fights, romantic movies starring Rudolph Valentino, and the crowning glory of the ballyhoo years, Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight. Charles Lindbergh's flight across the Atlantic was a sensation. Lindbergh made a daring solo flight that deserves respect. He responded to his new fame with humility. After his great achievement and his gracious response, America's appetite for the truly trivial began to wane. The first real steps toward the moon took place in these years. Younger students will learn about Robert Goddard's liquid-fueled rockets. Rockets had been around for thousands of years. The Chinese invented gunpowder rockets around the time of Christ. But there was no way fireworks could accomplish what Goddard wanted to do. He wanted to send a rocket into space. Make sure your dialectic students notice the link between Goddard and Lindbergh. When Lindbergh found out about Goddard's rockets, he provided much-needed support and encouragement that helped Goddard continue his work. Murder trials gripped the nation's attention for weeks during the Coolidge administration. The Hall Mills and Snyder Gray murder trials, for example. Clarence Darrow, the founder of the ACLU, made a sensational defense of Leopold and Loeb, two teenagers who wanted to commit the perfect crime just for the thrill of it. Darrow helped them escape the death penalty by claiming they were merely products of their environment. Alfred Hitchcock turned this real case into a creepy psychological thriller called Rope. In 1925, Darrow decided to defend Darwin. At that time, Tennessee prohibited public schools from teaching Darwinism. Darrow challenged that law in the Scopes trial. His opponent was William Jennings Bryan, the great populist orator and 3 times Democratic candidate for president. Bryan hadn't tried a case for 36 years, but he gladly responded to the call to uphold the Tennessee law. Bryan believed that Darwinism was undermining Christianity and replacing it with a belief that the rich had a right to oppress the poor as a part of the survival of the fittest. Social Darwinism went against everything that Bryan had ever stood for. After all, he was the man who accused the rich of his own party of crucifying the common man upon a cross of gold in 1896. William Jennings Bryan won the case, but Darrow made him look foolish in the process. The Scopes trial was a huge publicity victory for Darwin, Darrow, and the ACLU. Bryan won the battle, but he lost the war. The Scopes trial was the last big case of Bryan's long career. He died just 5 days after it ended. While William Jennings Bryan was making his final futile stand against Darwinism in Tennessee, a young man in Germany was taking the theory of the struggle for survival to new heights. Adolf Hitler believed that Germany was the master race that must destroy its enemies to fulfill its destiny. Hitler was born in Austria, but he moved to Germany when he was 3. He was close to his mother, who indulged him, and distant from his father, who regularly beat him. In 1905, young Hitler moved to Vienna, where he tried to go to art school. Vienna was the cosmopolitan capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a place where many ethnic minority groups could peacefully coexist. Vienna had a rich and cultured Jewish community, and it was there, rejected by the art schools and homeless on the city streets, that Hitler focused his furious resentment on the Jews. When World War I broke out, Hitler served in the German army. He reached the rank of lance corporal. He was a courier, a runner who carried messages across the battlefield. It was one of the most dangerous jobs on the front, but Hitler seemed to lead a charmed life. When other soldiers treasured the sense of camaraderie they had on the front lines, Hitler didn't. He was always a loner. Hitler was fearless at the front. Most historians agree that he believed he could not die in the trenches. He seemed to have amazing good fortune, especially when his inner voice told him to move right before shells landed. Hitler felt devastated when the war ended. He broke down in tears. The war had given him stature, vocation, and a purpose. Now he faced the loss of these. He would go back to the life of a vagabond, blinded by mustard gas. As the Treaty of Versailles and the horrific financial conditions of Germany unfolded, Hitler blamed the new Weimar Republic for Germany's ills. He decided that those who led the Weimar Republic were Jews and communists, the backstabbers of Germany. It was their fault Germany had given up fighting the war and accepted the humiliating treaty, its admission of responsibility for the war, its crushing financial burden of war reparations. Unfortunately, Hitler was anything but alone in such beliefs. As he worked with subversive elements in the German political scene, he became their leader and decided to use them to gain the power he needed to punish Germany's enemies and restore her fortunes. Hitler had natural gifts that propelled him into a leadership role. He had a good mind, he could think clearly, organize effectively, he had strong, practical ideas. His artistic talent enabled him to design the symbols and flag of a new movement. He resurrected the ancient swastika as a symbol of anti-Semitism and of the purity of the Aryan race. He placed this strong black symbol in a white circle, and then on a field of red and flags. Hitler had enough insight into people to write effective propaganda. He realized that people were gullible and would believe lies that were repeated. He came to believe that people would swallow really big lies if these were told with conviction and repeated often enough. He became committed to lying. Hitler was an effective orator. He could sway crowds through his speeches, as long as they started out desperate or disgruntled. His power was almost hypnotic and remarkably lasting. Once people were swayed, Hitler commanded great loyalty among his hearers. In 1923, Hitler tried to take over his home state of Bavaria. He had 15,000 brown-shirted followers by this time, armed with rifles, even machine guns. At a rally in a beer hall in Munich, the capital of Bavaria, Hitler proclaimed a Nazi revolution. He tried to seize the state government the next day. The police opened fire and killed 16 of his men. Hitler was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. He only spent 9 months in jail, but he used the time to write a book he called Mein Kampf, My Fight. There he revealed his core beliefs. Anti-Semitism, racism, and the big lie are all recorded in Mein Kampf in detail. Like Lenin, Hitler preached war and believed that struggle was the father of all things. God the Father, Hitler wrote, intended nations to fight until the stronger won. He who wants to live must fight, and he who does not want to do battle in this world of internal struggle does not deserve to be alive. Hitler made it clear that once he came to power, he intended to end democracy, abolish civil liberties, destroy the workers' trade unions, and set up a police state. He also planned to rebuild the German military and take back every inch of territory lost by Germany in the First World War. Hitler was intent on both preserving the purity of the German race and in expanding its territory for its growing population in Eastern Europe. Hitler thought the Slavs who inhabited the land of the East were worthless. He planned to use them as slaves or exterminate them like vermin. He claimed all Slavic lands like Poland and Russia as Lebensraum, German for room to live. But for Germans to live in the lands to the East, Slavs must die. Well, that was a positive benefit in Hitler's book. No one paid attention to Hitler's book because he was a nobody when it was published. The book's difficult to read. The first editions were riddled with errors. No scholar took it seriously, and no one in politics did either, until it was much too late. And that sad story is one reason for this curriculum. The handwriting was on the wall, hidden in plain sight, but nobody read it. Our goal for Tapestry students is that God may give them the discernment to listen seriously to similar madmen when they arise in the future. May God enable our children to protect the world from future horrors, or at the least, preserve a remnant when the times of judgment come.